Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This video uses AI narration to present our original book analysis. You want to understand languages, their quirks, and their fascinating history? Well, you've come to the right place. We're diving deep into Bill Bryson's The Mother Tongue, a witty and insightful exploration of the English language. Get ready for some linguistic surprises.
You know, what really grabs you about Bryson's work is how he shows the unexpected journey of English from a language that was, considered secondary to becoming the most spoken language around the world.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? A real journey with so many twists and turns, and definitely some head scratchers along the way. Like right from the beginning, Bryson jumps into just how unpredictable English can be. He brings up this word, set. Seems so simple, right? But it's got like over 100 different meanings.
Exactly. It's amazing. Bryson even calls it the, polysemic champion. It really shows how a single word in English can have so many meanings. It's part of what makes the language so flexible and expressive, but also, notoriously difficult to master.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like the Swiss Army knife of words. Versatile, sure, but maybe a little dangerous in the wrong hands. So what else is it that makes English so tricky?
Well, for one, Bryson points to the inconsistencies, like in pronunciation and spelling. Think about words like though, through, and tough.
Oh yeah, those are always tough.
Same letter combinations, but the sounds are totally different.
I know. It's enough to make anyone learning English just give up. But it's not just the sounds, is it? Bryson also talks about how the meanings of words themselves, they've changed over time.
Oh, absolutely. Like he gives the example of meat and deer. Meat used to refer to like any type of food, and deer meant any animal.
Wow, that's crazy. So different from how we use them today. What would cause those shifts in meaning?
Well, Bryson suggests these changes show, the evolving needs and perspectives of the people using the language. As English culture changed, so did the meanings attached to words. It gives us this fascinating look into, the history of English culture and how our understanding of the world has changed over time.
Yeah, that's so cool. It's like each word has this hidden history inside it.
It does.
It makes you want to, dig deeper and uncover those stories.
It really does. And Bryson encourages that. He shows us that language isn't just this tool for communication. It's a reflection of who we are, where we've been, and where we might be going.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of going, Bryson spends a good chunk of the book on the global spread of English. It's really amazing to think about how a language that started on this small island off the coast of Europe became, this global phenomenon.
It is a fascinating story. It's about cultural exchange, conquest, adaptation. English spread through colonization, trade, and, more recently, media and technology. And as it spread, it bumped into and interacted with all these other languages, leading to some, interesting results.
Like those Japanese loanwords we talked about before. It's so creative how they've taken English words and adapted them.
Exactly. These adaptations aren't just about convenience. They show how English words are becoming part of different cultural contexts.
Yeah, it really shows how dynamic language can be. Always evolving, always absorbing influences. But I guess not everyone is thrilled about this whole linguistic globalization thing.
Right. Bryson talks about how some cultures, like the French, they've really pushed back against all these English words coming in. They've even taken steps to protect their own language, going as far as introducing fines for using English words in some cases.
Wow, that's pretty serious. It's interesting, isn't it? This tension. You have this desire to keep your own linguistic heritage and cultural identity. But at the same time, there's this force of globalization pushing for everyone to connect.
It really raises the question of whether we can actually control how language evolves or if it's ultimately something beyond our control.
Yeah, it's a debate that's still going on, which makes me wonder, where does all this leave the future of English?
Well, Bryson tackles that head on in the book. And he brings up some pretty interesting, even unsettling possibilities. He even suggests that British and American English could become mutually unintelligible in a couple of centuries.
Whoa, now that's a prediction. But English has this long history of adapting and evolving. Wouldn't it be more likely that it just keeps changing in unpredictable and maybe even more fascinating ways?
That's definitely a possibility. I think what Bryson's getting at is that trying to predict the future of English is like trying to, pin down a moving target. It's a language that's constantly changing. Yeah. And that's part of what makes it so captivating.
I agree. So far, we've talked about how unpredictable English can be, the evolution of meaning, the global reach, and even hinted at its potential future. The mother tongue is clearly packed with insights into how English works. But is there something specific that stands out to you as Like a key takeaway.
You know, what really fascinates me is how Bryson manages to connect all these intricate details of language to our everyday lives. He shows us the hidden stories behind the words we use, the grammar rules we follow, even the names we carry. It's about recognizing that language isn't just some abstract system. It's a part of who we are and how we experience the world.
Absolutely. And he does it with so much wit and humor. It makes you want to keep reading, keep discovering the next linguistic surprise. I'm already itching to jump back into the book and explore some of those other topics Bryson covers, like the origins of place names and the evolution of slang.
Those are definitely some highlights. He even goes into the world of swear words, exploring their origin and how the boundaries of what's offensive have changed.
Sounds like the mother tongue is a must-read for anyone who's ever wondered about, well, the English language, its quirks, and its power. We'll be diving deeper into some of these topics in the next part of our deep dive.
We will. But until then, if you're ready for your own linguistic adventure, I highly recommend picking up a copy of Bill Bryson's The Mother Tongue.
You can find a link to buy the book in the description below. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe to Mindful Moments for more insightful book analyses. We'll be back soon with more linguistic gems from the mother tongue. See you then.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Bill Bryson's The Mother Tongue. We've been talking about, the unpredictable nature of English, but it's not just like spelling and pronunciation that can be confusing. Bryson also gets into this fascinating stuff about English grammar and how it's kind of shaped the way the language has evolved.
Okay, grammar. Not always the most exciting topic, but I'm curious. What does Bryson have to say about it?
Well, he argues that English grammar, with its, relatively simpler structure compared to like Latin or German, actually played a big part in its widespread adoption. It made it easier for people from different language backgrounds to pick it up.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, a simpler structure would definitely make it less intimidating to learn. But it's got to be more than just simplicity, right?
Yeah.
Didn't Bryson also talk about how historical events have impacted the language?
Exactly. He points to events like, the Norman conquest back in 1066, which brought in tons of French words into English. And then you have the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, which helped standardize spelling and spread literacy.
It's amazing to think about how events from centuries ago are still shaping the language we use today. It's like this linguistic ripple effect.
Exactly. And as English kept evolving, it didn't shy away from borrowing words from other languages. It embraced them.
Oh, absolutely. English had this more the merrier approach to vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of borrowing, we can't forget about those Japanese loanwords. It seems like they've really taken a liking to English.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And it's not just like taking the words. They've actually adapted them to fit their own culture, often shortening or combining them in these really playful and unexpected ways.
Like those examples you mentioned. Salorman for a corporate worker, or skinship for physical intimacy. They've given these English words a distinctly Japanese flavor.
It's really cool. It shows that creative energy that comes out when languages meet and interact.
Definitely. But we talked about how not everyone is so happy about this kind of linguistic fusion, like the French and their efforts to keep their language pure. Are they the only ones who feel this way?
No, not at all. Bryson talks about how this resistance to linguistic globalization isn't just a French thing. A lot of cultures around the world are struggling with this tension between holding on to their own linguistic heritage and dealing with the forces of globalization.
It's a tough issue, for sure. On one hand, you have this beautiful diversity of languages and cultures. But on the other hand, the world is becoming more and more interconnected.
Yeah, it makes you think, can we really stop language from changing? Or is it just like a natural part of how languages evolve?
And that brings us back to Bryson's prediction about British and American English maybe becoming mutually unintelligible. What happens if that actually comes true? What would that mean for English as a global language?
That's a great question. I mean, would we see completely separate Englishes emerging, each with their own rules and vocabulary? Or would some other language step in and become the new global lingua franca?
It's hard to picture a world where English isn't the dominant language. But as Bryson reminds us, language is always in motion. Who knows what the linguistic landscape will look like in a few hundred years?
Exactly. And that's part of what makes studying language so exciting. It reminds us that nothing stays the same. Everything is constantly changing, especially language.
So Bryson has given us a lot to consider about the future of English. but he also really dives deep into its past, like revealing these amazing stories behind the words we use every day. Did you know that even our surnames can be like linguistic time capsules?
Oh, yeah, that's one of the best parts of the book. Bryson goes into the origins of names and explains how surnames often reflected, professions or locations, or even personal traits. Names like Smith, Cooper, and Miller, for example, point back to the jobs our ancestors did. And place names can tell us so much, too. They give us glimpses into the history, geography, and culture of a place. Bryson even gets into, the world of British pub names, talking about their love for quirky and absurd names.
It's amazing how much history and culture can be packed into a single word or name. And Bryson doesn't shy away from the more, let's say, colorful aspects of language either. He even talks about swear words.
He does. He traces their history and looks at how what's considered offensive changes over time and in different cultures.
It all goes back to that idea that language is a reflection of who we are and how we see the world. But before we go too far down the rabbit hole of swearing, maybe we should step back and think about what all of this means for our listeners.
Definitely. I think the main takeaway from the mother tongue is that language. It's not just a bunch of rules or some boring academic subject. It's a living, breathing thing that's constantly changing and adapting to the world around us. And by understanding how English has evolved, we can really appreciate its complexity, its quirks, and its power.
Well said. And if you're feeling inspired by all this, I encourage you to check out the mother tongue yourself. You'll find a whole world of linguistic wonders waiting for you. But before you go, make sure to subscribe to Mindful Moments for more insightful book analyses.
And leave us a comment below. Let us know what interesting things you've discovered about language.
We'll be back soon with the last part of our deep dive into the mother tongue. We'll explore even more of the amazing stuff from Bryson's work. See you then. All right, welcome back for the last part of our deep dive into the mother tongue. We've talked about so much, from the weirdness of English spelling and grammar to its global influence and what might happen to it in the future. But there's this one thing about Bryson's book that I just keep thinking about. It's how much he clearly enjoys uncovering these hidden stories behind language.
Oh, absolutely. That's what makes the mother tongue such a fun read. He's got this sense of wonder and curiosity about language, and it makes you want to discover things right along with him.
Exactly. And one of the places where that really comes through is in his whole section on place names, those labels we use for locations. He shows how they can actually be glimpses into history, geography, even culture.
It's crazy how much information can be packed into a single name. Bryson talks about how a lot of British place names show the influence of all these different inviters and settlers they've had. Romans, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, Normans, you name it.
Wow, so it's like this linguistic tapestry.
Yeah.
Woven together from all these different cultures and historical events. Oh, and speaking of tapestries, Bryson doesn't just stick to the serious stuff. He also spends some time on British pub names. Those wonderfully weird names they have? It's like they love the absurd and unexpected.
Oh, totally. Like the frog in nightgown or the bull in spectacles. Oh, and the bucket of blood. That one's my favorite. You can't help but laugh at how ridiculous they are.
I know. It's like they were challenging each other to come up with the most outlandish name possible.
Yeah.
But even in those nonsensical names, Bryson finds a connection to history and culture. He explains how a lot of them came from signs or symbols that used to hang outside the pubs, often representing local trades or events.
Yeah, it shows that even the most seemingly random parts of language can have these fascinating stories behind them. And Bryson doesn't just stop at place names and pub signs. He also talks about personal names, like how last names often came from jobs, locations, or even personality traits.
Oh, right. He points out names like Smith, Cooper, and Miller. They were originally occupational surnames, showing what our ancestors did for a living. And then there are names like Hill, Wood, and Rivers, clearly coming from geographic features. It's like we're carrying a little piece of history in our names.
Exactly. Makes you wonder what stories your own name might tell. Oh, and speaking of stories, Bryson even touches on, swear words. He looked at their history and how what's considered offensive changes over time and across cultures.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that language isn't static. What was once taboo can become totally normal and the other way around. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the mother tongue, I think that's a key takeaway. Language is always changing. It reflects who we are, how we think, how we see the world.
I agree, 100%. And as Bryson shows us so well, exploring language can be this incredibly fascinating journey of discovery.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So if you're ready for your own linguistic adventure, we definitely recommend checking out Bill Bryson's The Mother Tongue. You can find a link to buy the book in the description below.
And don't forget to subscribe to Mindful Moments for more insightful book analyses. We're always digging into new and interesting topics, and we'd love for you to join us.
Until next time, happy reading.